So we are in the first golden age of Byzantine, so new era of art history. Um, this era is called the first golden age of Byzantine or the age of Justinian. So Byzantine art is divided into different ages. We are currently in like the 24th golden age of Byzantine. Now, I'm not a medievalist, so I can't tell you the differences between the golden ages as they go further past the second golden age, because we only cover the first and second golden age of Byzantine in this course. But if you are interested in Byzantine art and you're still looking for a research project, topic, which I certainly hope that not be the case, you might consider Byzantine art past the second golden age of Byzantine. So the thing that defines the first golden age of Byzantine is the age of Justinian, or the influence of Justinian as emperor in Byzantine art. Byzantium is the early Christian empire under Roman rule during the time of Constantine. So that's why we call it Byzantine. Um, the land is still volatile, and there are threats to the empire everywhere. Rome is sacked, and the struggle for power continues into the until Christianity is established as the empire's official religion in the 4th century. So we talked about this in terms of Constantine. We talked about him deciding that he is going to legalize Christianity because the battle for a faith seems to be something that is just politically ripping the empire apart. And so Constantine decides that it would be better to legalize Christianity than continue the uprisings and rebellions that are going on across the empire. So the art of Byzantium is divided into 3 periods: the early, the middle, and the late. And you'll only need to be able to understand the differences between the early and middle. We're not going to look at the late. Early Christians liken Christ to imperial figures. So we saw that at the end of early Christian, Christ was starting to look more and more like a Roman official. This likening Christ to imperial figures eventually results in iconoclasm. Therefore, early Christian icons are very rare. Christ is not depicted on the cross, and we talked about it being illegal for that. Crosses were not depicted at all. The fact that crucifixion was a common form of punishment was set aside, and the emperors tried to sort of absolve themselves of taking responsibility for that act, because the act of crucifixion was causing even more rage and rebellion. Jesus is represented as a patrician in the first golden age of Byzantine. In the middle age of Byzantine, there's a new line of emperors that take over. And there becomes a great renovation in art, and monasticism becomes a driving force in restoring the art, restoring art in general. There is a monk named Basil I, and he regards himself as the restorer of Byzantium. So that kind of gives you an overview of what we're going to cover in the first golden age of Byzantine and the second golden age of Byzantine. Here you have a map of the Byzantine Empire under the reign of Justinian. You can see that they've gained back some control in North Africa. They have a good firm hold on Alexandria now, and they are ruling Carthage again. We study a style called the imperial style at this time. This happens to be the largest surviving Byzantine panel. It is the leaf from a diptych, and it is an image of Saint Michael. It is made of ivory, and it's a relief. You can see that Saint Michael stands at the top of a flight of steps. The spacing, though, or depiction of Michael seems to feel as if the angel floats. They're hovering over the step. Why? Because you've got this interesting play of overlap with the wings that sit in front of the columns, the Corinthian columns that he stands in front of, but yet the columns at the feet tend to jet out in front of his feet. And so because of that, you get this weird play of what feels like he stands behind the lower columns but in front of the upper columns. In addition to the arc at the top of his head is highly decorated. Lots of great little details. And then at the very top, you've got this inscription that was typical of the Roman Empire. We saw that a lot on the triumphal arches, the inscription that dedicated some honorable image to the emperor. The flowing drapery that clothes Justinian, or Saint Michael, tends to reveal the shape of his body. So, this harkens back to the Roman traditions of the Greek traditions of wet drapery in classical art. They're still carrying some of those Roman traditions forward. St. Michael represents victory, the victory of Christianity over Rome in general. And we see a new style emerge called the imperial style. The imperial style is a style that I refer to as, it's a style that we refer to and help define the age of Justinian. And I'll point it out more so as we go along. There's no shading in the face here, there's no color. So it's a little bit harder to describe, but the imperial style tends to have this diamond-shaped face with deep inset eyes, a small nose, and a little bit wider mouth. St. Michael holds an orb in one hand and a staff in the other, which are both power objects. So the big thing this slide, I just wanted to show you a panned out view of the church as a whole. You can see that it's very large. You can see in front of it, there are gardens with great large fountains. I do believe they've been added as time has gone on. Let's go to the interior of the church. The feature that really distinguishes Hagia Sophia is from the other buildings in Rome, like the Pantheon, is the mystical quality of light that floods into the interior space. Justinian wanted you to be able to walk into this church and feel completely transformed from going from the outside into the inside. He wanted you to feel as if you had been transported to heaven. And it's part of why the church was so big. In order to get that feeling of otherworldliness, Justinian had to make the church very, very large. The ceiling is gilded in gold with beautiful little tiles, gold tesserae. But the thing that people really talk about that sets this church apart is the dome. The dome is, like I said, 108 feet in diameter. So it's very large, but it also encompasses a clerestory. And the clerestory is 40 windows large. So if you go all the way around the dome, there's 40 windows. And those windows, when the light fills the church, makes the dome feel as if it floats. Your textbook describes it as riding on a halo of light. Visitors to Hagia Sophia from Justinian's time and today have been really struck by the light that the church brings in. It sort of feels like the dome rests on a pillow of light. There was a poet who wrote about the building, of course, from Justinian's request. He talks about the dome and says it looks as if it was suspended by a golden chain from heaven. He said, "You might say that the space is not illuminated by the sun from the outside, but that the radiance is generated within. So great an abundance of light bathes this shrine all around." Paul the Silentary was the one who wrote about the dome, and he compared it to the firmament which rests on air, and described the vaulting as covered with gilded tesserae from which glittering streams of golden rays pour abundantly and strike men's eyes with irresistible force. It is as if one were gazing at the midday sun in spring. Hagia Sophia not only is about the light that comes in through those 40 windows, but it's about the mystical element of the light bouncing off of the gold tesserae that receive the light. The building itself is very large. I told you it's 270 feet wide by 240 feet deep. And it's 180 feet off of the ground. So it gives you an idea that the building is huge. It's another one of those buildings that we talk about where you feel outside even though you're inside the building. Because of its size, the building tends to feel as if you've been transported into a different realm. The light seems to dissolve as it as it comes into the church and bounces off of the walls. And it gives a sense of abstraction in terms of spatial recognition. So when you're in the room, what seems to be in front of you feels odd because the light is so very penetrable and because it bounces off of a surface. There was a philosopher from the age who wrote about Hagia Sophia, and he said that light comes from the good, and light is the visual image of God. And Justinian knows that this is the popular ideas about light. He knows that this is the way society views Christ, and so he uses that common belief in the light to be transformative in his design. Well, Isidore of Miletus and Anthemius of Tralles are the ones who use that in their design. So a new technology was developed in order to create Hagia Sophia, and that technology is called the pendentive. The pendentive is the way that the dome is supported. So up until this time, the only way they had to put a dome on top of a building was through this technology called a squinch. The squinch is square or cubular. The pendentive essentially is a dome, and the top of the dome has been cut off and another dome rests on top of that dome. And I will show you a drawing so that that makes more sense. But the areas that you could see the evidence of a pendentive are in these triangular spaces that the dome rests on. There are paintings in the spaces. They have wings, look like angels. These areas that are the areas that are left over in the arches that support the dome are the areas that we call the pendentive. Here you can see the dome, how it rests on the top of the church. Now, this is a different view than from the main dome. So just wanted you to like look at it and see how light transformed other parts of the church as well. We do think that there were likely mosaics underneath the current image that you see here. When the church was taken over by a mosque, the mosques don't allow for images of people. You're not allowed to have an image of a person in a mosque. And so they would have covered over top of any mosaics that were figurative and placed intricate designs there. And so because of that, we find that there are some mosaics that have been recovered from underneath the plastering that the mosques did, but we are pretty sure that there are more yet to be discovered. This is a cutaway view of Hagia Sophia. You can see the dome that rests on top. Now, I know this part looks a little bit square, but I promise you it is a dome on top of a dome. And then you can kind of see like how tall the interior is from a cutaway viewpoint. The church is a central plan church, and we talked about church plans in the early Christian segment. Church plans that are central just simply mean that they're either round, like the one at Santa Costanza, or square. And this one is square. It's based off of the Greek cross plan instead of the Roman cross plan. There are lots of political reasons why that would have been in the best interest. Justinian's trying to get the Christians to refocus on positive things that the imperial parties have done for Christianity instead of focusing on the negative things, which would have been included in crucifying the person that they feel was God on earth. So, because of that, Justinian decides that his large building initiative needs to be dealt with in the church. Here's another interior view of Hagia Sophia in the mid-morning. The thing about these type of churches where light is a big part of their worship experience, the church is going to look very different at 8 o'clock in the morning versus at noon versus at 5 o'clock in the evening when the sun goes down. And so being part of that ability to see the light transform the inside of the church was part of Justinian's plan. He really wanted this church to have a sense of transformativeness. So here's a drawing of how the squinch and pendentive technology worked. The pendentive was created by using a dome form and putting a dome on top of a dome. So you can see that this, the squinch is a dome on top of a cube to the right. That's the traditional way of erecting a dome on a structure. So Isidoro of Miletus and Anthemolus of Tralles come along and they say, well, how can we make the church more about domes? And so they design a dome that will support a dome. So essentially that's where the pendentive comes in. If you were to fill in the barrel vaulting that's gone on here, you would be filling that side in and it would be a conical shape. And so they take the top of the cone, chop it off, and put the dome on top. Then the weight of the dome is actually carried by these very large piers. They are these large, they're big, massive spaces in the wall that hold the weight of the dome. If you backtrack a couple slides, you'll see where the weight of the dome rests on those big, heavy piers. In fact, when they transformed the church into a mosque, the piers were decorated with large, round, circular shields with Quranic text. So if you look back into the slides, you'll see those large piers that I'm describing to you in this slide. If you are fascinated by the way that they built Hagia Sophia, it would be my suggestion that you watched this particular special on Nova. It's a very good one, and it gives you inside information on how Isidore of Miletus and Anthemius of Tralles designed this very spectacular building. We talk about the building being plain in terms of its exterior, but because the building is so very large and encompasses so very many dome-like structures, it's quite a beautiful building just on the outside. So highly encourage you to watch this special on Nova if you're interested. It definitely is one that I think you'll get a deeper understanding of what Hagia Sophia is all about. Now, if you were to choose to watch the special on Nova, if you just wrote me a little paragraph that told me what you liked about the video, or what you learned, then that would be your delve deeper activity. All right, so let's talk about another church that Justinian builds. It is the Church of San Vitale in Ravenna. So Justinian decides that because Rome has been sacked and because it feels like the power isn't working so well in Rome, that he's going to move the capital. So he moves the capital of the Roman Empire from Rome to Ravenna. Ravenna is a little more protected because it is in the northern part of the boot. And it's a place, I think, where not that many people would expect to see the capital in. It's not a major port like Rome is, and so he figures it's more protected if he moves the capital to Ravenna. Interestingly enough, even though he moves the capital to Ravenna, he never actually goes there. He and Theodora never travel to Ravenna. Instead, he builds this church. It's the Church of San Vitale in Ravenna. It is something that I was fascinated by in my graduate program, and so I did a large research project on the Church of San Vitale. And so I hope to share all that lovely information that I learned with you about the Church of San Vitale. But first, let's talk about the exterior. So what you're seeing here in the exterior is, once again, that very plain, non-decorated exterior that we looked at in the Church of Hagia Sophia, that we've seen in most of the early Christian churches. Not only do you see a very plain, non-decorated exterior, you see an exterior that mimics the Church of Santa Costanza. So why would Justinian want to build a church that mimics the Church of Santa Costanza? That answer is pretty simple. Santa Costanza is a church that was built to honor Constantine's niece. Constantine is tied to that church. And so Justinian wants his church in Ravenna to echo what Constantine did, because Constantine was the one that legalized Christianity. And so you end up with this octagonal shaped church, similar to Hagia Sophia in terms of a structure that is central, a central plan instead of a Roman cross plan. They're trying to get away from that idea of the Roman Empire, because the empire has been so torn apart by religious rivalry, and most of the power was associated with those forums, like the Forum of Trajan, that were built and that the new Christian churches tended to follow in terms of floor pattern. The Church of San Vitale is a two-story church. It's pretty tall. It has a central dome, but it's not a dome like Hagia Sophia's. It's a dome that's built in, that mimics the octagon or the octagonal shape. You can see that it has some mirroring of the apses from Hagia Sophia. So it's sort of a church that was built through the lens of Hagia Sophia and of Santa Costanza. Here you see the footprint of the church. You can take this link to. Here's an interior of the Church of San Vitale. You can see how the ceilings are done in such great detail. Lots of heavy patterning that you can see here. You see all of the work that is done here are done in mosaics. There are rondelles. Those are those circular motifs that you see that decorate the interior of the barrel vault or the inside of the barrel vault. Those rondelles are portraits of people who were important within the theology of the church. Here's a panned out view of that apse. This is the head apse at the church, the choir of the church. It is the place in which you see these mosaics on each side of the apse. The mosaics are the representation of Theodora and Justinian serving the people the Eucharist. So this is the mosaic that I told you was on the apse. Remember, the panned out picture of the apse had a very highly decorated mosaic barrel vault. On each side of the barrel vault, you see a mosaic, a very detailed mosaic, one of Justinian and one of Theodora. If you remember all the way back to the Roman Empire, when we were looking at the sacred arches or the triumphal arches, when you would go through the triumphal arch, there was a relief carving, one on each side of the arch. This mimics that style from the triumphal arch, only now they're doing it in the churches. So there's a mosaic, a detailed mosaic on each side of the apse that is at the altar. And these detailed mosaics took place of Justinian and Theodora actually being in Ravenna. You can see here on the mosaic of Justinian, he stands in the center of the mosaic. He wears a brown cloak with a piece of jewelry that attaches the cloak at his shoulder. That is called a, wait a minute, it'll come to me. I can't remember right now. We'll come back to it. On each side of him, there are people who are very important. If you're looking at the right side of him, your right, his left, you see a man who has a brown cloak on top of his monk's robe in white. That man is named Bishop Maximianus. Maximianus was a very important figure in the building of San Vitale. Justinian's building initiative was very large, and it was so large that he really couldn't afford to pay for the initiative that he creates. And so because of that, Bishop Maximianus is the one who actually puts up most of the money for the church in Ravenna. He has access to quite a bit of money. He's a fairly wealthy gentleman. In fact, he is so wealthy that he sculpts himself. Well, he commissions a sculpture um, made of ivory for a throne for himself, and he he puts up most of the money to build Ravenna, or to build the Church of San Vitale. And so, because of this, Justinian is trying to honor him in this mosaic. And if you look at their feet, Bishop Maximianus actually stands in front of Justinian. But do you remember the diptych that we looked at of St. Michael at the beginning of this lecture? Well, the same artistic technique is being employed. Do you see that his feet stand in front of Justinian, but his shoulders and his arms look like they are behind Justinian? With this treatment of the figure that is so very flat, it is possible to create an image of a person where it looks like they stand in front of and behind the object. So just like in the diptych of St. Michael, you see this strange interplay of space with Bishop Maximianus. This term of flatness is called isophalic, and I will spell it for you and add it to the next slide. But the point is that the isophalic treatment of the figure makes the figure seem very flat, and it feels as if you can't tell where this figure actually stands in space. If you cover up the heads of the figures, other than Bishop Maximianus and Justinian being clothed in something that is a little bit more fanciful, it's hard to tell who is who. There's no major iconography that tells you who's a bishop, who's Justinian's right-hand people. All of that just comes from this isophalic treatment of the figure. Additionally, you see a typical mosaic done in the imperial style. And we're going to look at a close-up of Justinian's face and Theodora's face so you can see what I'm talking about a little bit more closely. But here you see that the mosaics are now incorporating these heavy patterned borders. The borders are made of precious minerals, precious gems. The little white dots that you see that create the pattern around the mosaic, those are all semi-precious pearls. Above the pearls, you see rows of emeralds, rows of sapphire, and rows of rubies. In the mosaic, Bishop Maximianus is named. You can see his name inscribed above his head. That is a practice that goes all the way back to those triumphal arches that you saw, the Latin text that named who the arch was dedicated to. The heavy encrusted jeweled border was very expensive. But now that we've studied the images of Justinian and Theodora, I think that you can see that there is what we call an imperial style. We know that the people that did the mosaics, the artists that designed the mosaics and that designed, I guess it would have just been the mosaics. Well, and we saw the ivory carvings that were done in the facial style of the imperial style. They came from what we think were pattern books. Justinian couldn't be everywhere in the empire. And so because of this, we recognize a pattern of shading in the face in these mosaics that are typical of the imperial style. And because of that, we call this the imperial style. So, just like we talk about Justinian's panel, we also talk about Theodora's panel. It's really hard to talk about Justinian or Theodora without talking about the other person. They were a very strong team when they started the Byzantine Empire. Theodora was a very interesting woman. She had a past that was a lot more colorful than most empresses that we talk about. Justinian met Theodora at a circus. Circuses were places of entertainment for men. And she was one of the performers that traveled with the circus. Her mother had had her out of wedlock because she was one of the circus performers. And the life of women at that time was one in which women really didn't work unless they were working to entertain men. And so being a performer as a woman meant that you were also a prostitute. And so Theodora's mom was a prostitute, and Theodora was born into that situation, and she was a prostitute as well. Justinian fell in love with Theodora, and so he changed the laws to state that he could marry whoever he wanted instead of having to marry someone of imperial blood. And so he marries her, and she becomes empress of Byzantium. They worked together to secure the empire further than when they started. So when they started, the very first map that you saw that the Roman Empire controlled without Spain and France was their beginning. But as they continued to reign, they were able to reclaim some of the empire's lands, including most of northern Africa, Carthage, and Alexandria. There have been accounts that attribute Justinian's success in conquering to Theodora's input. Justinian was sort of an awkward fellow. He really was not personable. He was kind of backwards. And Theodora was someone who supported him and encouraged him a lot. She encouraged him not to give up on Alexandria and Carthage. And because of that, they were able to continue their stronghold in the empire. The mosaic that you see is very similar to Justinian's in terms of the border being encrusted fully with precious gems. You see rubies and sapphires and pearls. The crown that Theodora wears is 100% made of precious material. So the pearls that you see are real pearls. The emerald colors are real emeralds. Same thing with the rubies. Her gown is adorned at the top lavishly with beautiful gem work. And we'll see a close-up here in a minute of their faces with the gem work on top of their shoulders. So the women to Theodora's right, well, to my right, Theodora's left, are her ladies in waiting. They're the people who attend to her. They're people who help her in the court. You see that they wear robes that are highly patterned, and they're individualized more so than the people that stood to the right of Justinian. They still have that isocephalism that we talked about, where their heads are all in the same line and their feet are all at the same line, and they have this fairly flat feeling to the figure. On the other side, you see two men who were representative of the states, representative of the military power that Justinian is trying to procure the relationship of the military power and the state with the religious power, since this is a new sort of way of life for the imperial or for Roman leadership. Also, you see a curtain that the imperial military forces are pulling back. The curtain leads to the other side of the apse, which would have been Justinian's side. And then you see the baptismal font there. Theodora holds a bowl or a chalice. The chalice is the wine that would be served during communion. Justinian, I didn't point this out, but I should have. Justinian holds a loaf of bread. That loaf of bread would have been the other half of the Eucharist, the body of Christ. She holds the blood of Christ to serve to the congregation. Like I said, these portraits served as Justinian and Theodora's presence in Ravenna. They never actually went to Ravenna. They met with Bishop Maximianus all the time, but he always came to them. Additionally, Theodora was somewhat of a women's rights leader in terms of she supported Justinian well, and was a wonderful empress, but she fought for the rights of women. At that time, women did not have rights to their children when their children were born. She saw this situation a lot in the circus, and so she worked hard to get women more rights than what they had at the time. Justinian loved her very much, and they were very much a power couple in Byzantium. So I had mentioned to you earlier the imperial style. Let's take a closer look at the imperial style. The imperial style is a style that we think was created by using pattern books to make mosaics. You can see here a close-up of Justinian and Theodora's portraits in the apse mosaics. You also get a close-up view of the precious gems that were in the crown and the jewels that both Theodora and Justinian wear. The Theodora's jewels at her shoulders feature a large emerald in the center and 2 rubies, one on each shoulder. Justinian's jewelry has a large ruby in the center. The imperial style is a style that where the easiest place to see it is in the shape of the eyes and the detail of the face. So you see in all 3 portraits, 4 portraits that I've shown you here, these are all mosaic work done, portraits of Justinian and Theodora. And you see that their faces are all depicted in a fairly similar fashion. The eyebrow ridge is fairly prominent. The eyes are given definition by a double eyelid or double lines to indicate the eyelid, and a line underneath the eyes with a large pupil in the center. The cheeks are shaded in a ruddy way or in a nice pink highlighted way to illuminate the cheekbones of the empress. Justinian had more of a ruddy complexion, and that's commonly shown in the mosaic portraits that are done of him. And what we think is that there was an imperial pattern book that was approved by Justinian, that was made by an artist, that an artist would use whenever they were making the mosaic portraits. They can trace the mosaic glass factories that made the tesserae tiles for the mosaics. So tesserae are these little tiny tiles that are made of glass, and in general they're about the size of a quarter, and they all work together to make up the portrait that you see in front of you. Like I said, there are some tiles that have a mirrored backing to them. They have a metal piece that goes on the back of the glass. That metal piece is highly reflective and will create dimension within the mosaic. The mosaics often look very, very flat. Don't forget that they're being professionally photographed with a very bright light on them so that you can see the differentiation and color variation of the gems. In the real world, we don't view These mosaics in that manner, they're usually viewed through candlelight or through a lower level light, and so you get a more true depiction of what the artist was trying to create whenever they created these mosaics. This is the Church of Saint Apollinare Nuovo in Ravenna. You can see from the exterior that the church is very plain, just like the other churches that we've looked at in the First Golden Age of Byzantine in the exterior decorations. When you go inside the church, you see a three-part nave elevation, which means that you've got one story here that are the side aisles. That's the aisles that are flanked with the repeating barrel vaults with the Corinthian columns. The next elevation is an elevation of mosaic images, and then the top elevation is the clerestory. In the roof, you have coffers. Coffers are these square recessed panels that tend to make the roof lighter in weight. Hadrian used them in the Pantheon quite effectively to make the weight of the dome lighter. Here, I don't think the weight of the ceiling was an issue, but they're there for decorative purposes. The mosaics along the side aisles are images of Roman officials within the church. So that sent a message to the powers that be that Justinian is working with the church as one. In addition to the mosaic, or the church itself is dedicated to a local saint, Saint Apollinare. So this is the apse mosaic at the Church of Saint Apollinare Nuovo, and you can see the person in the center is Saint Apollinare. He's standing in the middle of green landscape. The landscape in this apse mosaic is really quite remarkable in that it represents a deep amount of space. We haven't seen that yet in apse mosaics and mosaics in general, a sense of atmospheric perspective. And this one definitely takes on that atmospheric perspective, primarily through the lines that create the different levels of landscape. So first you have Saint Apollinare. He's standing at the forefront of the mosaic's plane, and as you go back into space, the grass gets lighter until it meets the horizon line of the sky and the earth. The sky is done in gold mosaic tile, and the red glow, or the red ring around the globe, is created out of beautiful red mosaic tiles. Saint Apollinare stands in the orant position with his arms stretched out and his palms open to the sky. That orant position is actually a position that's synchronized all the way back to Egypt. It's an Egyptian way of praying. We saw it in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. You see angels there in the sky, and there are 12 sheep standing at Saint Apollinare's feet, representing the 12 disciples. The figure recalls Christ as the good shepherd, the one who attends to the flock of his, or to his flock, but also is an image of Saint Apollinare. And Saint Apollinare's lambs are actually symbols of the congregation. So both meanings are represented here in the apse mosaic. Something interesting that I read, and I'd have to do a little bit more research to learn about this, but the apse mosaic here is now called the triumphal arch. So whenever they switched in Byzantium to Christian style art instead of imperial art, that the Roman Empire published for propaganda. The propaganda then became combined with Christian imagery. This is the Church of Mount Sinai. It's the Church of the Virgin Monastery in St. Catherine, Mount Sinai, Egypt. The Church of Mount Sinai is one that I would love to know a lot more about. I don't know that much about it, other than what your book tells us. But I did want to explore it a little bit with you. Justinian rebuilt a monastery that was dedicated to Mary, and this is the monastery he rebuilt. It was part of his large building initiative, and it's where there are many historical Christian things that happen here at this very spot. It's the place where Moses received the Ten Commandments. And it marks the spot where God first spoke to the Hebrew prophet from the burning bush. It is on a migration route to Palestine, Syria, and Ireland. And so because of that, it was a very important church for Justinian to rebuild. Eventually, it will become a very important spot for the Crusades. St. Catherine's Monastery is the sacred and imperial monastery of the god Trodden from the Mount of Sinai. It's located in the Sinai Peninsula, and it's one of the oldest functioning Christian monasteries. It was constructed in the 6th century under the orders of Justinian, and was built in the spot where, according to Christian belief, the angels brought the body of St. Catherine of Alexandria after her execution. It also enclosed the existing chapel built by Helena, mother of Constantine I, to commemorate the site where Moses observed the burning bush. The site was originally dedicated to the Virgin Mary, but was eventually rededicated to St. Catherine. If we go inside, we can see the apse mosaics. This apse mosaic has always fascinated me because of the shape of it. When you stand in front of it, it seems to be an image as a whole, but in all actuality is a three-dimensional arched image. You see the rondels of important people in the barrel vault, as well as rondels along the back apse wall. You see the Roman tradition of the text that lines the top of that wall with information about the people that are pictured in the rondels. Christ stands in the middle of a mandorla. A mandorla is that egg-shaped thing that Christ sits in, and beams of light project from behind him. Those beams of light are a fascinating thing to have in this mosaic. That type of see-through quality in terms of the beams of light is very hard to achieve artistically, and the fact that they've been able to show it in the apse mosaic is quite remarkable. You see people dressed in different swaddling robes around Christ. There is a cross that is in the center of the triumphal arch there, and then the mosaic that covers the face of the arch. It definitely has this Roman look to it, a Roman sense of style in terms of the costuming that's worn by the figures on the mosaic. This is a manuscript illumination from the Rubula Gospels, and it was made in Syria during the end of the first golden age of Byzantine. You can see that there are two levels to the world here, an earthly level and a heavenly realm. The heavenly realm is where Jesus stands in the mandorla, and then the earthly realm is where Mary stands in the orant pose, praying to the heavens. She has a halo around her head, and you can see that the artist relies greatly on the outline to define her garment. This would have been done on vellum, or is done on vellum, and you can see the hand coloring of the vellum, but the linear quality that's created in trying to communicate the robing of the individuals. This separation of earth and heaven is going to be a new focus that we have coming up in the second golden age of Byzantine. We get that Roman love of bordering there. You see the pattern that goes all the way around the manuscript illumination. And the people that are on the earth are all talking about what's going on in the mandorla in the heavens. The gospel writers surround Jesus. That's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then you can see underneath the mandorla this this orange cradle that looks like wings. And there are animals that are underneath Jesus. Those are all symbols for the gospel writers. The Rabula Gospels would have been Gospels that were created for the church at Mount Sinai. This is the Virgin and Child between Saints Theodore and George. It is an icon. It was done in the 6th or early 7th century. It's encaustic on wood, and it is in the monastery of St. Catherine in Mount Sinai. So let's talk a little bit about icons and iconoclasm. An icon is a Greek word for image. It is small and portable typically. It was used as a prayer tool for Orthodox Christians to focus on during prayer. It is one of the finest examples of St. Catherine's Monastery icons. It is done in encaustic on wood. Encaustic is a waxy type of paint. I've never actually seen someone paint an icon, but or done in the encaustic process, but I'm sure you could look it up on YouTube and find all about how they applied the wax to the icon and how they applied the pigment. The wax is a resist type process, so they would have put the wax on and then put the paint on top and then let the paint gather in the areas that were not waxed. Mary sits with a large halo behind her head. Saints Theodore and George are next to her, and then the angels stand beside her. She holds Jesus in her lap. Jesus is this strange-looking baby with a body of a miniature toddler and the head of a ambiguously aged child. Mary sits on a throne as she is queen of the heavens, and she sits in this royal blue robe. You can see even in the images of the monastery of St. Catherine's in Mount Sinai that imperial look that I told you about. You can see that the eyes are created with the prominent eyebrows, the double eyebrow or double lined lid of the eye, and then the lower line for the lid or for the eye. Then this prominent line that goes down the side of the nose and a smaller mouth. The garments of St. George and Theodore are heavily decorated and are quite beautiful. This particular icon is only about 24 inches by 20 inches. It's not that large. A lot of times in the Greek Orthodox Church, icons were considered to be very, very powerful. They would stay on the altar for 40 days and 40 nights to be blessed by the priest and then given to the icon owner. I used to be married to a Greek Orthodox man, and we got many of these icons for wedding presents. So let's talk a little bit about icons and iconoclasm. Icons were used for both public and private viewing. If you go into a Greek Orthodox church today, there are lots of icons around. When you see an icon, you would make a cross over your chest, bend over, and kiss the icon. We call that venerating the icon. Some icons are small, others are fairly large. A good example of a large icon would be the icon screen that's usually at the front of the church. That is decoration for worship. Icons are very special to early Christians and Christians in the East because they use them to focus on for prayer. They feel that icons are more personal and an intimate form of worship for God. Some feel that they should kneel before the icon and burn incense before them while they pray or seek protection for a cure or an illness. Early Christians are suspicious of depicting the image of Christ because one of the 10 Commandments is thou shalt not worship graven images. Because of that, the Islamic religion does not have images of people in their churches. For this reason, Protestant Christians don't have images of people in their church. But at this time, iconoclasm becomes more and more rampant because of this idea that thou shalt not worship graven images. Here, just a small political cartoon. The iconoclasm got to be fairly serious, so much so that Roman officials would come by to see if you had icons. Some people believe so strongly in their power that they protected their icons over anything else. This is a sort of funny, silly, goofy little political cartoon where you can see a man has lost his head, but he's still keeping his icon. We lost many icons due to iconoclasm, and so the icons from the first golden age of Byzantine, not very many of them exist. This particular icon is an